Hi. Hi there. I'm Michael Parkinson. And I'm a candidate for regional council, and I'm coming to you live from campaign headquarters, which is my basement here in Kitchener. And it's my pleasure to provide some clues on questions that were asked of candidates in terms of how to advance the priorities and transform document, and with particular consideration to notions of justice and equity. And if you know my work, you know I've been all about prevention for about 3 decades, mostly locally here. The premise being the evidence reflective of that the earlier you engage in prevention opportunities, the better the outcomes, the less harms, and the better the return for taxpayers. And that's true whether we're talking about health systems, social systems, criminal justice systems, and it's certainly true in environmental systems. And I would argue that many of the crises that we're facing today, not being able to get an ambulance when you call 911, not being able to fill 1,200 spots at regional hospitals, overflowing homeless shelters and encampments, over reliance and disproportionate harms delivered through the criminal justice system, and of course all the climate stuff that's happening that we see locally and further afield. Those are missed prevention opportunities, and some of them, there were good recommendations 30 years ago in this report. There were recommendations before then, and one recommendation that always stuck out for me in the Citizens Advisory Committee was a recommendation for a net gain in ecological areas and natural areas. This report was written at a time 30 years ago when 80% of the wetlands had been eliminated in Waterloo region, when we were paving over the best farmland in North America, and when we were cutting down woodlots and what remained of our forests, and then building subdivisions and naming the subdivisions after the species that used to exist there. So I still believe that we should be aiming for no net loss, and if possible a net gain through the reintroduction of native species and guarding against invasive species, protecting areas. Um, Around that time, and I was reminded of this the other day, I was cycling with a volunteer, Andrew, and his children from Psycho Waterloo region. We went around the trails and the roads of Waterloo region, and such vast improvements over the early days when we were advocating for better cycling infrastructure, not just lanes, but also basic infrastructure at places like shopping malls, like a single place to park your bike, for example. But we still have such a ways to go. And around that time, we were also, a group of us and myself was involved as well, advocating for sustainable transportation, livable communities that met the needs of people who live there, sustainable architecture, that respected the laws of thermodynamics, for example. And then some years later, I had the privilege of spending a bit of time with this person, Jane Jacobs. And if you're in urban planning or interested in community economics, you'll know Jane Jacobs. And she later provided a keynote for an organization we started that advocated and tried to realize better transportation options right across Ontario. The title of her talk was "Are Planning Departments Useful?" And their thesis was that all the really great initiatives in urban design, urban planning, transportation planning have come from citizens. They typically do not emanate from government departments. And that's why I say it's critical in terms of how we implement the recommendations in the Transform document, particularly paying attention to notions of equity and justice, that it's critical that who's around the table and how those decisions are made. And so you'll see that it's a key part of my platform, whether we're talking about environment or we're talking about health systems and criminal justice systems and so on, that citizens most affected by policy and programming decisions be involved at the table, involved in their design, if not the delivery. That is so key, how we get there, not just what we're trying to do. So I'm totally on side. I mean, it warms my heart to see the 15-minute neighborhood go mainstream in the regional official policies plan. Yes, we need to build up, not out, those, and they need to be mixed use so you can live, work, and play close to where you live. We want those communities to be human scale, not just barren facades at street level. If you look around Waterloo region, you'll note that some neighborhoods are segregated based on income or other factors. So the more we can get away from that, the healthier people who live in those neighborhoods, regardless of their income or health status, will be. That's evidence-based. supporting the move away from reliance on fossil fuel and those forms of transportation is key. We've made some great success that way. And, it's long been my belief that if you plan cities around children and older adults, you end up with all of those things fairly organically in terms of respect for climate change, in terms of respect for building livable communities. And I still believe that today. If you're paying attention to the budget projections this week, and they're just projections, but uh, to maintain current services, possibly looking at double-digit rise in taxes. And key to that is the fuel costs that the regional fleet is beholden to, because we're dependent on diesel and gasoline. So shifting that away, that fleet away from into electrical vehicles, for example, is a priority. If you're paying attention in August, you would have seen a REAP report on energy retrofitting, but with particular attention to folks who are renting or low income, and the disproportionate barriers that they face. So adaptation and of course new builds, getting to net zero buildings. The technology is just amazing, and it improves every day. Protecting what's left of the woodlots, wetlands, and forests that exist here is absolutely key, if not getting to that net gain. And then anything we can do to advance equity in all of those systems, this notion that humans can dominate each other and it won't have an impact on our commitment to the environment, is something that we need to move away from. And the impacts we're talking about are not just local, but they're in the southern hemisphere, and they're overseas, and we're seeing that playing out in real time. So this is a crisis, not a spectator support. And that old phrase, think globally, act locally, is still true. And if I could leave you with one thing, it would be Margaret Mead's quote: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." We have seen that here in Waterloo region. And after the election's over on October the 24th, regardless of the outcome, I hope you'll be a participant in democracy and advocating for a livable future, not just for present generations, but for those that follow us. Thank you so much for your time.